what Buzz Aldrin had to say, the second man to walk on the moon. He said, "I wish to endorse strongly the president's new direction for NASA. The truth is that we have already been to the moon some 40 years ago. A near-term focus on lowering the cost of access to space and on developing key cutting-edge technologies to take us further faster is just what our nation needs to maintain its position as the leader in space exploration for the rest of this century." What do you say to that?
Well, Buzz and I have disagreed on a lot of things, and it's certainly that one. Although Buzz does want to go back to Mars, and I support that. But I believe we should do it in a logical stepping stone process.
Late 1960s and early 1970s, Andy was a child participant in Project Pegasus, which was the US time-space exploration program at the time of the emergence of time travel in the US defense technical community. Andrew is on a crusade as a lawyer and statesman to have the US government disclose its time travel secrets. He believes that lobbying the US government to declassify its secret teleportation capability so that teleportation can be adopted globally as the leading form of civilian transport is the most important environmental cause of our time. In 2016, Andrew D. Basiago will be a candidate for President of the United States under the banner Andy 2016. A Time for Truth.
My late father, Raymond, shortly after graduating with a BS in electrical engineering from Lehigh University in 1951, after the famous July 1952 overflight of Washington, D.C., by 9 extraterrestrial craft that had been clocked on radar at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia, as traveling at 7,000 miles per hour and also exhibiting such properties as disappearing at one location in the sky and then reappearing elsewhere in the sky, had the unusual experience of having a U.S. military officer appear at the side of his desk at Okanite Company in Paramus, New Jersey, where he was working in a non-defense technical capacity. But my father was brilliant, not just in engineering, but in mathematics and physics, which made up part of his course of study at Lehigh. So this officer instructed him that the next Monday morning he should report not to Okanite, but to Curtis Wright in Wood Ridge, New Jersey, where he was assigned to the Ramjet engine project. The Ramjet was a supersonic craft that it was hoped would be able to chase the extraterrestrial craft out of the Earth's atmosphere and even operate in the near-Earth environment. And my dad was tasked with the responsibility of designing a metal alloy that would enable the craft to operate at those speeds, both in the atmosphere and in space, without melting from friction from molecules of air in the atmosphere and molecules of space dust in space, to literally sort of scoot the flying saucers away from our planet. The lives of U.S. airmen were sometimes lost in those activities during the early saucer flap of the 1950s and 60s. And so he continued to work in classified defense-related engineering capacities. So at the time of my birth, in September of 1961, my father had already worked on several very sensitive aerospace projects with reporting requirements to the CIA, the Air Force, the Navy, and so forth. Now, in early childhood, I entered kindergarten at age 4 in September of 1966, and then quickly turned age 5 because I was born in September of 61. So prior to my entry into kindergarten, I had been exhibiting non-ordinary abilities, that is to say special abilities, at our home in Morris Plains, New Jersey, USA, that my father had witnessed. One of the things I was doing, I was going down into his carpentry shop in our cellar, and I was listening to him thinking to himself, and then talking to him with knowledge of what he was thinking about. In other words, he became aware that I was telepathic and I was picking up his thoughts and then saying things relative to what he was thinking. He also came out of the cellar one time into our rec room, which was on the ground floor of the house, and he saw me, it's not levitating, but just causing several of my small toys, my alphabet blocks and some Tinker toys, to hover 3 feet off the ground. What I had done is pick them up and place them about 3 feet off the ground, and I was not only causing them to hover, but some of the toys were actually orbiting around each other in the way that our Earth orbits the sun. So I had either the latent abilities of things human beings used to do or the incipient abilities of the so-called indigo children. I like to say that I wasn't a trailing edge baby boomer, I was a leading edge indigo. And my father was clearly an expert in physics. He had studied it at one of the world's leading engineering universities, and he was working in it. By then, around 1964, he had moved on to the Thomas A. Edison Research Labs in West Orange, New Jersey, where he repeated many of Nikola Tesla's teleportation experiments, his Bortle teleportation experiments that Tesla had been working on going back to 1899 during his famous stay in Colorado Springs, Colorado. So my father was not just a defense technical engineer. He was an expert on some of the new applications in quantum physics that were coming along. So I think that what must have happened is he must have informed the classified defense technical community. This would be the group of physicists, engineers, and engineers who were working on new weaponry and new ways of gathering intelligence in an EM spectrum in which we pick up about 1% of what's visible in the EM spectrum. So they were working on espionage devices where they could see things that were in the invisible range of the electromagnetic spectrum. And they began to work on devices that would enable us to have a counterforce ability vis-a-vis the extraterrestrials, who, for example, were in one place in the sky, and then they would blink out and immediately show up somewhere else in the sky. So they began working on essentially what we might broadly caption as time travel devices. So I know that my father had passed along my special abilities to the United States Defense Department because he began taking me to some of these classified engineering locations in New Jersey in the summer after my kindergarten year, which was the summer of 1967. So clearly a file had been made of me because, Project Talent was searching for young Americans of high intelligence, high psychic ability, and evidence of native political ability, basically those who will be the leaders of our generation. And so I know that my name must have ended up in some file involving the indigo children that were emerging at that time, evincing these special abilities. But I never really talked to my father about why I was selected for the program. The bottom line was that I was, and I did so as the son of a U.S. aerospace engineer with reporting requirements to the CIA and other intelligence agencies. And that was in the nature of what government officials, intelligence community members, and military officers were doing in that Cold War context. They were basically volunteering some of their most intelligent progeny into these government projects because the U.S. government was very concerned about two perceived threats. They knew we were being visited by extraterrestrials, and they didn't know what the agenda of these different extraterrestrial races were. And they were also very concerned about World War III between the United States and the former Soviet Union. They actually believed that the number one military threat to the continental United States was probably not either a limited or an all-out nuclear war with the USSR, because that would lead to the destruction of the former Soviet Union as well. So it was believed that we were in a stalemate. But they were concerned about a land invasion of the continental United States by the Soviet Army aboard the Soviet Navy, which was as large as the United States was and a very capable Navy. And so they wanted to develop devices that would enable us to gather intelligence about what the extraterrestrials and the former Soviet Union were doing, and also be able to operate in a military theater in which some of the technologies that we would have to possess counterforce were operating essentially in the invisible range of the electromagnetic spectrum, essentially to cope with potential adversaries who were in possession of time travel.